Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Nice to see so many faces back.
Yeah.
It's always refreshing and really a delight to see when people come back. Are you a Caleb or a Thomas? I believe today that we are in a world that is split in its belief of what can or cannot be achieved, or can't be bothered. And as we live in the world, we also tend to fall into the same groupings. So what are those groups, you might ask? I believe there's three. You may disagree, but I believe there's three. The first is the positive, the half full, yes we can. The second is the negative, the glass half empty, no we can't. And then the third is that the one that sits on the fence and that says, I'll wait and see what happens. I'll join in with the crowd, because that must be the best way forward. It certainly is the less stressful way for a lot of people to just go along with the crowd. You know, this isn't something new. This isn't something just of our age. You know, if we look into the Word, we will see that it began in Genesis with Adam and Eve. And it's gone on through ever since, right up to today. And so, as I deliver this message, I'd like you really to think about which group you feel you fall into. And whether you are happy with where you are at. Or would you like to do something to change your situation or viewpoint? And so what I want to do is I want to read two examples from the Word. And the first one, which highlights this one situation, is the story of Caleb. And the second one, which highlights the second, is Thomas. So I would like to read Numbers 13, 25 to 33. After exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel at Kadesh, in the wilderness of Paran. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit they had taken from the land. This was their report to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here is the kind of fruit it produces. But the people living there are powerful, and there are towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. The Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites, Jebusites and Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan Valley. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once and take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we travelled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought too. I think what we really need to do is we need to look at what Caleb said. Because this is really the most important part of the word. And I'll repeat verse 30. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once to take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. This was definitely the can-do, positive approach to the situation. Caleb and Joshua had no doubt that they could take the land and gain the rewards that the Lord had promised his people. A land flowing with milk and honey. They also believed it was what the Lord wanted. But there was a stumbling block. The majority thought otherwise. And if we then read on into Numbers chapter 14, you can see the reaction of the group and the doubters. And we also can read of the Lord's reaction. He wanted to disown them and destroy them. Why? Because they didn't do what God wanted them to do. The whole thing is that Caleb was absolutely right. Is that they should have gone into the land and taken it. Because that is what the Lord's instruction actually was. Although it isn't highlighted here. If you read the surrounding passages, you'll know that that was what the Lord wanted. He wanted them to go in and take the milk and the honey, the produce of the land. He said that they would eat of the grapes or the drink of the wine that they hadn't produced. He said that they would eat of the grain that they hadn't grown. And it was there. Caleb and Joshua said, it's there, we saw it. Let's go and do it. But no. Those that sit on the fence were there, weren't they? Do I really want to get embroiled in this? Let's see what the rest come up with. And so the majority were against it. So they were the negative aspect. So Caleb, we've heard mentioned before. Caleb is the can-do. I will. We call it the Caleb spirit, don't we? That the Holy Spirit puts on us. It's the can-do. We can do. And I will explain a little bit more later on about why we can do. So, of the element that didn't trust the Lord, they didn't want to go in and take. What did God do? He wanted to destroy them. He wanted to wipe them out. He was so angry. Have we ever recognised that aspect sometimes of God in our lives? But the thing is that Moses, that faithful man of God who had his ear permanently tuned to Radio God, his batteries never ran out. He was always tuned in. And so he went to God and asked him to change his mind. So, what happened? Well, when you think about it, God said that he would wipe out that generation. They would not see the promised land because they did not do what I wanted them to do. And secondly, here's the one that I would find very difficult, apart from being alive, of course, under those circumstances, was it probably prolonged their journey in the wilderness for nearly 40 years. Because it was only a matter of perhaps months that they got to that point after they left Egypt. And instead they then wandered until that generation basically had died. So think about these things when you have an opportunity to do something in a positive way. If I don't do it, are there consequences? Let's now look at the opposite story, which again we all know, and it's been carried forward into modern day language and is now known as Doubting Thomas. And it's John 10:24 to 29. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you." he said to them. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." So we get from that Thomas falls into the group of the doubters. Obviously you would say that because we know the expression doubting Thomas. But also those who sit on the fence waiting to see which way the situation goes. The problem with the Thomas approach is that both trust and faith become questionable and can have quite dramatic consequences on the future. I'm aware that what you might be thinking in that we always need to be cautious, not run into things that could go very quickly awry, that we need to weigh up the circumstances and potential consequences so we may make wise decisions. Of course, we must. We can't go and do all those things unless. So what I'm trying to impress here is that we need to seek the Lord first and to listen to what he says and act in accordance with his instructions. So if we go back and look at the case of Caleb and Joshua, it wasn't a snap decision. "Oh, I'm going to jump into it and things could go awry and I'm making a foolish decision." No, they believed that they had been viewing the goodness of God's promise and that God wanted them to take it there and then. Otherwise, why would Moses have sent them? As I said earlier, Moses was attuned to God's instruction. Numbers 13:1. Failure to act in accordance with God's desire had severe consequences, as I just mentioned a moment ago. I don't know that I would want to be wandering around in the desert, the wilderness, for 40 years, not really knowing where I'm going. Although I've nearly wandered 40 years in God's palm, in his hand. He's carried me, and he's carrying all of us as we go through what some might say are wilderness years at times. Because we all have those moments when we feel that we're not achieving what God really wants of us. But sometimes we do class them as perhaps the wilderness years of our lives. But sometimes, that's when God is saying, "I'm resting you." We might be there now, but I don't see it as a wilderness. I see it as a paradise in preparation for what God's got next. So, we know what God says about Caleb. The man who said, "I can, we must." Numbers 4:24 says, "But my Caleb has a different attitude than the others have." So if we have a different attitude than those that say, "Don't think we can. I think I'll sit on the fence. I'll wait and see what the others do. I can't really be bothered. But I will if they will." So, goes on, "He has remained loyal to me." So Caleb remained loyal to God. And that is what we need to do. We need to remain loyal to God. "He has remained loyal to me, so I'll bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess their full share of the land." That's a promise. And if we obey God and follow every his instruction, even though some people might think it's absolutely raving mad, that's the promise. He will bring us into the land that we explored, and our descendants will possess their full share of that promise. Wow. Especially when we think of family members who don't yet know the Lord. They're going to share in the promise. Wow, yeah. If you're still mulling things over because you're not sure which camp you belong to, let me try to encourage you by telling you some of the positive decisions that you've already made. The first one, when you made a decision to follow Jesus, someone whom you have never seen, you walked the positive can-do road. Secondly, that when you became baptized in the Holy Spirit, you once again took a positive step. And thirdly, is that when you became baptized by total immersion in water, you made a positive declaration to the world. Because the public can see. The public don't necessarily see the first two, but the third one they do. So you have indeed made those positive can-do decisions. And I want you to remember that, because each and every one of us has a can-do positive attitude. Even though you may not think so, you have. And I'll explain why in a moment. So if we're not all Calebs with that can-do attitude, what has happened? Is it a lack of faith? Can I remind you of the first definition? Or firstly, the definition of faith. Hebrews 11:1 from the Passion. Now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for. It is all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen. So the second thing you might ask, is it lack of trust? So again, let's look at what trust is. And we go to Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, of which you all know. Without doubt, everybody tends to know that one. But let me read from the Message. Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do. Everywhere you go, He's the one who will keep you on track. That brings it into modern day parlance, doesn't it? We could all understand that. So I ask you again, what has happened? The answer is very simple. Is that the enemy, who is Lord of all the earth, as we know, and we are born into that realm, he still has control over things that we don't have control of through Jesus. He, in fact, he invades us. He comes in, he prowls around like a roaring lion, 1 Peter 5:8. Seeking to destroy and steal and draw people away from Jesus. You see, once we've made those three things, we're his enemy. He doesn't like it. So he tries to upset us. He tries to pull us back. And once he's pulled us back, he wipes his hands of us, really. He doesn't care anymore about us. All this love that he puts out forward, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. It's lies. It's hogwash. For those Americans amongst us. So, without us realising that sometimes that small voice that we sometimes hear is Satan telling us we can't do it. No, you can't do that. Oh, I wouldn't even try that. Just think, if you tried that, what would happen? If it went wrong, what would people think? Oh, you would look a right twerp, wouldn't you? So the thing is that he puts all these things on us to try and turn us into the negative attitude or to sit us on the fence. So we must always be on our guard. We don't want to have our positive attitude stolen from us, because that is what he's trying to do in every situation. Because there is always a yes and a no, and I'll sit on the fence. In everything we do, there are those three options always available to us. When I worked for the Underground and we were putting forward proposals, there always had to be one proposal on the table which said, do nothing. I won't tell you which the favourite one was. Dave, last week, he spoke that we need to check the source of what we hear, because different words have different understandings. And sometimes the same word can have many meanings. And so we always need to check what we hear. And where do we check that? The Bible. God doesn't always expect us to act immediately. Do you realise that? Sometimes, of course, if there's a bus coming rolling really towards you, you know you've got to do something immediately, otherwise you're going to go. So you jump out the way. But in those particular times, I don't think you actually need anything. You do it by instinct. You do it by the instinct of the Holy Spirit in us. But even people who don't know Jesus yet still would jump out the way. But the thing is that we have to differentiate between the instant demands upon us as to where the source is from. There's only one time that I can ever think that it's been instantaneous, when something's been presented and it's been a cry, it's been an answer to a prayer, and that prayer is, "Help, Lord!" And the answer is invariably instant, because it's crisis. So I would like to, in closing, because it's not a particularly long word this morning, I'd like to say that all things are possible through God who strengthens me. He puts the Caleb can-do spirit into us. He doesn't put the sit on the fence or the you can't do. He puts that positive into us. Mark 9:23. I can do all things through God, because everything is possible in God. So let us all be a Caleb with a can-do spirit. Reap the rewards, putting the enemy behind us. You know, the biggest and probably the most unused expression that is used in the world today, and Jesus used it a lot. Get thee behind me, Satan. Okay? So as soon as the can't do attitude comes in, get thee behind me, Satan. I will do what God tells me to do. Remember, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 14:13. I tried desperately to find the old song, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But all that came up on YouTube was something I didn't recognise. So I can remember part of the words, I can't remember them all. So Lord, I ask you to forgive me. So think about what it is every time. 1. Can do. My glass is always half full. I deny the can't do. My glass is always half empty. And 3. I will not sit on the fence. I will have a positive attitude.